For generations, the people of Okoye revered their kings, a dynasty that had ruled with iron fists, unchallenged. At its heart, the kingdom was lush with fertile lands, lively markets, and bustling streets. But underneath this prosperity lay a dark secret. The valley that bordered Okoye had once been the site of terrible events. The very spirits of that valley were said to be vengeful, casting a curse upon the royal bloodline of Okoye. The curse had begun to show its effects with King Chukwuma, the present ruler. Every market day, without fail, the powerful king would descend into a state of madness. He would tear off his royal robes, dance madly through the streets, and accuse everyone of betrayal. The once mighty king, who struck fear into the hearts of his enemies, would lose all control, his eyes wide with panic and confusion, as though haunted by unseen forces. His fits had become the terror of the kingdom. Guards tried in vain to contain him, while citizens cowered or fled from the market square, their livelihoods disrupted by the king's antics. The whispers grew louder. The king is cursed. Every market day, chaos reigned until the sun dipped below the horizon, and the king, exhausted, would return to his chambers, unaware of the havoc he had caused. Meanwhile, in the neighboring village of Ize, lived a young boy named Chidi. From a tender age, Chidi had shown an extraordinary talent for weaving cloth. His fingers moved swiftly and skillfully, creating patterns and designs that no one else could replicate. His colorful weaves told stories of nature, of the sky, and even of the unseen spirits that walked among them. Soon, word of Chidi's talent spread far and wide, and people began to seek him out, eager to see what he would create next. Despite his humble beginnings, Chidi became somewhat of a celebrity in the neighboring villages. It was said that anyone who wore his cloth felt lighter, as though the very spirits had blessed them. Some called him a magician, others called him a mere boy with quick hands, but all agreed that there was something special about Chidi's work. Chidi, however, was a quiet and humble boy. He didn't care for fame or wealth. The royal family of Okoye had heard of Chidi's wondrous weaves, and when Princess Nena's wedding approached, an emissary was sent to Eze with an invitation for the young weaver to craft a special garment for the occasion. No outsider had been invited to Okoye in years, not since the curse had taken hold of the royal family. The kingdom had grown isolated, fearful that the madness of the king would spread beyond their borders. Chidi, though young, was intrigued. This would be his chance to see the great kingdom of Okoye and perhaps understand the mysterious curse that people whispered about. So, with his loom and fabrics packed, Chidi made the journey to Okoye. Upon arrival, Chidi was awestruck by the bustling streets, the towering palace, and the grand preparations for the wedding. Yet, beneath the excitement, he could sense the unease that lingered in the air. The villagers of Okoye walked quickly, avoiding eye contact. Their conversations were hushed, their eyes constantly darting towards the palace, as if waiting for something dreadful to happen. Chidi made his way to the marketplace, curious to see what treasures the kingdom had to offer. He was impressed by the variety of goods, spices, jewelry, and vibrant fabrics, but there was something odd. Everyone seemed on edge, and the market was strangely quiet. And then, without warning, it happened. A loud commotion broke out at the far end of the marketplace. Chidi turned to see a man, clad in royal robes, running wildly through the stalls. His clothes were torn, his hair disheveled, and his eyes wild with fear. It was King Chukwuma. His madness had begun. The king shouted nonsensical accusations, waving his arms frantically at the villagers. "You all betray me! I see you plotting! I know your schemes!" he bellowed. His voice echoed through the market square, sending chills down the spines of all who heard him. Guards chased after the king, but he was too quick, darting between stalls and knocking over baskets of fruit, spilling goods onto the cobbled streets. Children were hurried away by their parents. Merchants closed their stalls, and the entire marketplace descended into chaos. Chidi stood frozen, watching the scene unfold before him. He had never witnessed anything like it. The mighty king, reduced to this, a madman running naked through the streets. As the guards finally cornered King Chukwuma and led him away, Chidi couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be here. This wasn't just a journey to showcase his weaving talent. There was a deeper purpose unfolding. The whispers of the villagers about the curse echoed in his mind, and he wondered if he could uncover its origins. That night, after the chaos had settled and the kingdom was shrouded in silence, Chidi wandered through the deserted streets, drawn by an inexplicable force. He followed a faint glow coming from the valley bordering Okoye. There, he stumbled upon an ancient grove where twisted trees reached towards the stars. The air was thick with the scent of earth and the sounds of rustling leaves. In the center of the grove stood 3 ethereal figures, spirits of the valley, cloaked in shimmering light. Their eyes glowed with an ancient wisdom, and their presence filled Chidi with awe. "Why do you disturb our slumber, young weaver?" one spirit inquired, its voice a melodic whisper carried by the wind. Chidi, trembling yet resolute, stepped forward. "I have come to understand the curse upon the king. The people of Okoye suffer, and I wish to help." The spirits exchanged
is
knowing
rooted in
glances.
betrayal and sorrow. Long ago, the king's ancestors committed grievous acts against the spirits of this valley. Their greed shattered the balance between the seen and unseen worlds, and now the bloodline is condemned.
Chidi listened intently, absorbing their words. Is there a way to lift the curse? The king must face 3 trials that will test his heart and spirit. The spirits replied, "He will need to confront the past to restore balance. You may accompany him, for your desire to be a peacemaker between our worlds could aid him in this journey." With that, the spirits vanished, leaving Chidi alone in the grove, filled with a newfound sense of purpose and determination to help King Chukwuma navigate the trials ahead. The next day, Chidi was brought before King Chukwuma, who had just emerged from another episode of madness. The king was weary, his once mighty spirit diminished. As Chidi explained the spirit's message, Chukwuma's expression hardened. "A mere boy seeks to instruct me," he scoffed, his ego flaring. "This is not about pride, your majesty," Chidi replied firmly. "You must confront the legacy of your ancestors if you wish to find peace. We must journey together to meet the spirit of the valley and face the trials set before us." The king stared at Chidi, his anger flickering beneath the surface. But deep down, a part of him felt the truth in the weaver's words. Reluctantly, he agreed. "Very well, we shall see what this journey reveals." Thus, Chidi and King Chukwuma set out at dawn, leaving the confines of the palace behind. They ventured into the valley, where dense forests whispered secrets and the air hummed with energy. Each step felt heavy with the weight of the king's past. As they made their way deeper into the valley, the landscape shifted dramatically. Towering trees with sprawling roots reached out like hands, trying to grasp at the sky. Vines draped from branches, creating a natural canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft beams. Chidi felt a mix of excitement and trepidation, while King Chukwuma walked with a stiff posture, trying to maintain his royal dignity despite the growing uncertainty in his heart. After a few hours of walking, they reached a narrow path flanked by thick underbrush. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, birds chirping, insects buzzing, and the distant rustle of small creatures. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the bushes, causing both of them to freeze. "What was that?" Chidi whispered, his heart racing. "Stay behind me," the king commanded, drawing his sword. From the shadows emerged a large, fearsome creature, resembling a wolf, but with glowing green eyes, and a body that shimmered as if woven from the very fabric of the forest. It growled again, advancing toward them with a menacing gait. King Chukwuma stood his ground, but Chidi, feeling the tension in the air, spoke softly to the creature. "We mean no harm. We seek the spirit of the valley." The creature paused, tilting its head, as if considering Chidi's words. "You dare enter this sacred place? Many have come seeking power, but few have sought redemption." "Redemption is what we seek," Chidi replied, standing tall despite the king's astonishment. "The king is here to confront his past and make amends for the sins of his ancestors." With a flick of its tail, the creature seemed to recognize the sincerity in Chidi's voice. "Very well, but your journey is fraught with trials. Only those who are worthy will reach the spirit." The creature stepped aside, revealing the path ahead. "Continue onward, but be prepared. The valley tests all who enter." As they progressed deeper into the valley, the terrain grew more treacherous. The path became uneven, and steep inclines challenged their stamina. A dense mist rolled in, obscuring their vision and muffling sounds. Chidi and King Chukwuma relied on each other for support, their initial reluctance to trust slowly giving way to a budding partnership. Suddenly, they reached a raging river, its waters churning violently. A rickety bridge swayed precariously above it. Chidi hesitated, his heart pounding as he looked at the swaying wood. "I can't cross that," he admitted, anxiety creeping into his voice. "Stay behind me," Chukwuma said again, his determination resurfacing. He stepped onto the bridge, but as he reached the middle, a powerful gust of wind rocked the structure, and he lost his balance, nearly falling into the rushing waters below. "Your Majesty!" Chidi shouted, rushing to help. With a combination of strength and quick thinking, Chidi steadied the bridge, holding it firm while the king regained his footing. "We must work together," Chidi urged, realizing that their survival depended on mutual trust. As they crossed, the waters roared beneath them, but with Chidi's help, the king found his footing. When they finally reached the other side, Chukwuma was breathing heavily, shaken but alive. "Thank you," he muttered, a note of humility creeping into his tone. Chukwuma and 17-year-old Chidi continued their journey into the Valley of the Spirit, their steps heavy with the weight of the trials ahead. The valley was vast, with tall, imposing trees that seemed to whisper ancient secrets as the wind passed through them. The deeper they ventured, the darker the path became, as though the valley itself was testing their resolve. Chidi walked close to the king, his hands clutching the woven bag he carried, inside which lay the tapestry he had made. It told the history of the royal family and the curse that plagued them, woven carefully in every thread. King Chukwuma was silent, his brow furrowed in thought. He had been told that the trials would test his heart and spirit, but he had no idea what to expect. As they reached the edge of a small cliff overlooking the valley, the first of the valley's spirits appeared. It was a towering figure with one leg, its body wrapped in a cloak of mist. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as it regarded the two travelers. "You have come to seek redemption," the spirit spoke, its voice echoing through the valley. "The bloodline of your ancestors is cursed for their arrogance toward the spirits of this land. But the curse can be lifted if you pass the three trials: the trial of strength, the trial of wisdom, and the trial of fear." The king nodded, his voice steady. "I am ready." The spirit's form shimmered and began to fade. "Then let the first trial begin. Strength." As soon as the spirit vanished, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The valley itself seemed to come alive, shaking and rumbling with immense power. Trees swayed violently, and rocks tumbled down from the cliffs above. Suddenly, a massive boulder blocked the path ahead, too large for even the king to move alone. "This is your first test, King Chukwuma," the voice of the valley spirit echoed in the air. "To lift the curse, you must use your strength not only for yourself, but for the sake of others. Push aside this obstacle and clear the way for those who follow." The king stood before the boulder, his muscles tensing as he placed his hands upon its rough surface. He tried to push it with all his might, but it would not budge. Chidi watched him struggle, and after a moment, he stepped forward. "Your Majesty," Chidi said, "I can help." At first, the king hesitated. His pride told him to face the challenge alone. But as the seconds passed, he realized that strength was not only about physical power. It was also about accepting help when needed. With a nod, he allowed Chidi to stand beside him, and together they pushed with all their might. The boulder began to shift, moving slowly at first, but then faster as their combined strength forced it out of the way. The path ahead cleared, and the spirit reappeared, its expression inscrutable. "You have passed the trial of strength," it said. "True strength comes from unity and humility. You may continue." The valley grew colder as they ventured deeper, and the path became more winding and treacherous. As they reached a narrow bridge hanging over a deep chasm, the second spirit of the valley appeared, its form ethereal and its face obscured by shadows. "This is the trial of wisdom," the spirit said. "You must cross this bridge, but beware. One path leads to safety, and the other to certain doom. Choose wisely." King Chukwuma peered at the bridge, noticing that it had two distinct sides, each looking identical. The valley spirit offered no further clues, only watching as the king and Chidi approached the edge. "How will we know which side to take?" Chidi asked, his eyes scanning the bridge nervously. The king was silent, thinking carefully. He knew this was a test of his mind, and rash decisions would only lead to failure. As he stood there, he noticed something. Small symbols carved into the wood on each side of the bridge. One side bore the symbol of an open hand, while the other bore the symbol of a clenched fist. "An open hand invites trust," King Chukwuma said aloud. "A clenched fist closes itself off from help." He stepped onto the side of the bridge with the open hand, confident in his choice. Chidi followed without question. The bridge creaked and swayed as they crossed, but it held firm. When they reached the other side, the spirit of the valley appeared once more, its voice full of approval. "You have passed the trial of wisdom," it declared. "The path of peace and openness will always lead to safety." Chapter 9. The Trial of Fear. The final trial led King Chukwuma and Chidi to a barren clearing at the edge of the valley. The air around them grew cold, and the skies darkened, as though the valley itself mourned what was to come. In the center of the clearing stood a wooden stake, charred black with age. Ashes from long-forgotten fires scattered across the ground. The spirit of the valley appeared, its form shifting like smoke, and its voice heavy with sorrow. "King Chukwuma, this is where the greatest sin of your ancestors was committed. They took a woman, lost in madness, and offered her as a sacrifice to the spirits of the land, hoping to secure their power and wealth. They showed no mercy. The land did not forget. Her screams haunt the valley to this day." As the spirit spoke, the shadows around the stake began to shift and stir. From the darkness, the figure of a woman emerged. Her hair was wild, her eyes filled with madness, and her voice rang out in a terrible wail that pierced the air. She thrashed and struggled as if bound by invisible chains, her cries echoing with pain and rage. "This is the one they sacrificed," the spirit said softly. "Her name was Akilah. To pass this trial, you must end her suffering. Make her stop screaming. Only then will the curse be lifted." Chukwuma stared at the woman, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of his ancestors' sins bearing down on him. Akilah's screams grew louder, her body writhing in agony as flames began to lick at her feet, just as they had all those years ago when she was burned alive. "Your Majesty," Chidi whispered, his voice trembling, "what will you do?" The king's mind raced. How could he possibly ease the suffering of a soul so tormented? He stepped toward Akilah, but the heat of the flames pushed him back. Her screams tore through him, each one filled with anguish, each one a reminder of the cruelty of his ancestors. Chukwuma closed his eyes, and in that moment, he felt the full weight of what had been done. The arrogance, the pride, the belief that power could be bought with someone else's pain. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could try to make amends. He could offer the one thing his ancestors never had: compassion. He knelt before Akilah, ignoring the heat of the flames, and called out to her. "Akilah," he cried, his voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at him. "I am sorry. I am truly sorry for what my family did to you. They were wrong. You did not deserve this." The flames flickered, and for a moment, Akilah's screams quieted. Her eyes met the king's, and for the first time, there was something other than madness in them. There was recognition. "I beg you," Chukwuma continued, his voice filled with sorrow. "Forgive us. Let us honor your memory, not as a victim, but as the protector of this land. Let your spirit find peace, and in doing so, free my people from the curse." Akilah's body stilled, her screams fading into soft, broken sobs. The flames around her began to die down, and the chains that had bound her vanished. Slowly, her form began to shift, her face softening, her eyes filled with a deep sadness, but also a hint of relief. "Forgiveness," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I forgive your bloodline, Chukwuma. But remember, power must be used for good, not for cruelty. Honor the spirits of this land, and honor me." With those words, Akilah's figure dissolved into the air, her form becoming part of the wind. The clearing grew still, and the heavy darkness that had plagued the valley lifted. The spirit of the valley reappeared, its voice filled with approval. "You have passed the final trial. Akilah's spirit is at peace, and the curse is lifted. From this day forward, let the marketplace in your kingdom bear her name, as King so her Chukwuma memory will never and be Chidi forgotten." Journeyed back to Okoye. The air felt lighter, and the world brighter. The land seemed to rejoice in the lifting of the curse. Upon their return, villagers gathered, eager to hear the king's account of his trials. Chukwuma felt pride and gratitude for Chidi, whose bravery had aided him in overcoming the challenges. "Today, we honor not only our ancestors' strength, but also the spirit of Akilah," the king proclaimed. "Her suffering reminds us of the power of compassion, and we will carry her legacy forward." With gratitude, Chukwuma turned to Chidi. "You have shown great wisdom and courage. From this day forward, you shall be my advisor, a position of honor, for you helped lift the curse from my bloodline." The crowd erupted in cheers, celebrating Chidi's new role. "And we will rename our marketplace Akilah Market." The king continued, his voice strong. "In her memory, we will create a place of community, joy, and prosperity, a tribute to the woman whose spirit now watches over us." As the villagers prepared for the celebration of Akilah Market, the king felt a profound sense of peace for the first time in years. The next market day arrived, and Chukwuma